Hello, everybody. This is our first session of Doctor Integration. TIBCO has been doing a ongoing series of webinars for Spotfire as well as data science, and we're expanding this out into our integration. Primarily, we're going to be focusing on TCI, and our session today will be about using Flowgo as a data layer. So what we want to do is imagine we have a data source that we want to create a REST API for. And we'll show how easy it is to do that within Flowgo, to be able to create and publish this REST API and to be able to do some query operations against that particular endpoint. So the system we're going to be using today is a MySQL database. For those of us who have joined us for any other trainings, this is a sample database. And what we have in here it's like a sample ERP database. We have some contacts, some leads, and some tickets. And we're going to focus on the ticket entity today. So the first step you're going to want to do is you're going to want to head over to your connections. And if you haven't seen the new TCI 2.0, the new interface now has a unified view for all of our applications. So we see all of our connect, our develop, and our integrate applications all in one panel. And you can filter out your applications, and you can also filter out your connections and your connection types. So the first thing we want to do is we create a connection to our MySQL database, and let's see what that looks like. So what we did was we created a new connector. We selected the new MySQL connector. We just called it MySQL 2. We entered the credentials that we needed for this, and then yes.
If you are intended to share the screen, probably, yeah.
All right, my mistake, everybody. All right, so let's head back to the beginning. Okay. All right, here we go. Back to the beginning. Doctor Integration using Flowgo as a data layer. Thank you, Ninad. He's been running Doctor Spotfire for some time now, and thanks for chiming in on that. Okay, so. All right. So after we log in, so just head back to our main page here. You can see now after you log in to TCI, and after you select your integration, then you have a unified view of your connect, integrate, and develop apps. So we're going to look at the first thing we want to do is create a connection. So we'd go here, we do create the connection, and then once that's done, we'd enter the parameters in. And then we have our new connection to this database. Now let's see the sample application that we have set up that's going to process this. So we have an application, and we created a flow, and this flow is triggered on receiving an HTTP request. And we can see what that looks like here in this configuration screen. So we're using a get method for this, and the path on this is going to be ticket. And this is really the basis of how we're essentially creating a set of REST endpoints. Now for the output settings, we have the option of using parameters either as query parameters or as path parameters. In this case, we wanted to simply use the query parameters. And we have set up a couple here, either the ID, which is the row ID, or the ticket number. And those are how we're going to be querying against our ticket objects in our MySQL database. And then we map the query parameters, and this gets mapped out to what's coming in on the trigger itself. Right? So we map out the trigger query parameter into the map flow from inputs. The reply settings, this is simply the schema that we're going to be returning. And we see pretty basic JSON here. It's going to be an array of objects, and the fields that we're going to be selecting from this object are ID, the create date, the ticket number, the subject, and the description that goes along with it. And then, in order to be able to map these back to the reply, you map each of these from the array. You map the ID from the loop. So you head to the flow and you map the loop ID, the create date, the ticket, subject, and description. And And this is just a way to map everything back as an array once we retrieve the records. All right. And we can see what this looks like here, the schema like this. All right. Now what we're doing is now what we're going to do is we're going to have a branch. We're going to first log a quick message just so we can track what the parameters were. This is a basic function in Flowgo. You just add the message here and you log it out. We're just gonna map out whatever that query parameter was, just as just to log that out. Then we go into our branching logic, and this is really here where we're going to split up how we're going to map either a single record or how we're going to parse the queries as they're coming in. So we added a branch here, and in this case, the branch condition, we have a success condition, and the condition here is if the query parameter for the ID is not, if the length of that is not 0, basically if that exists, then we're going to execute a SQL query using that as part of the select statement. And what we've done here, we've added a block for a MySQL query. And then the settings on this, we're going to select the connection for that. That's the connection that we just added. And our input settings are going to be, this is the actual, this is the query that we're executing. And here we're going to enter this in because we know what the schema of our database is. So we're selecting these fields, and what we're doing is we're using the where clause, the ID equals $ID, and that's how we parse the input parameters that are coming in for this operation. And the input here we can see is the ID. We've selected, we have that, and the output is going to be, the output is generated automatically from the schema of the database, the select statement that gets executed. So what happens is when you initially save this block here, right, this input setting, it evaluates this and generates the schema accordingly. And now we can see the fields that we have in there. So it's very easy. So what we're doing here is in this first branch, we're saying if there's a parameter which is set for the ID, we're going to use the this operation here. And then we map these back to the return. And what we do is map the data back. We map all these back out. Okay. And now the same thing we're doing down here. In this case, it's a fall through. If that parameter is not populated, then we come here and we execute we get these from we get all the tickets in this case, right? And the mapping is similar in that we have the input parameter, the output, and then we map this over to the return. And this is what generates the REST call that gets sent back. If we can see what this looks like in Postman. Give me a second to bring this up. So in this case, we have we're using the query parameter with these. This is the row ID of this, and then we send this over, and it returns a single record. And here we see where there's no ID in this, we send this over, and it returns all the records that are in the database. And that's going to give a second to parse out here. Now, the other options we could do, we could add additional query parameters to this, and then we could have different parsing routes in order to send these to different select statements, and we could return that. We could also add match ray on top of this for more security. We could have OAuth as well as other throttling and things like that. Additional options would be to use a post and then add records to the database using a post operation, and then we'd be able to execute those other operations itself. I know it's pretty short in terms of the way that the logic is laid out, but it is a pretty powerful method where you can take any of these data sources. What you could do in this, and it doesn't really matter which connection you're working with in here, you could use any additional data source, and basically you're just making a wrapper around this, and then you're parsing that out and sending that back to the calling, to the calling REST. Then you can add additional REST endpoints for your other objects, contacts, leads, et cetera, et cetera. Any questions on that? Okay, everybody, thanks for joining our first session on Doctor Integration, and be sure to check the website for additional sessions in the future.